Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the CKC channel. I'm your host, Fide Master Calvin Klaassen, and welcome to our first session here of Lyndon lectures. Welcome, Dr. Bouah.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Calvin, and good evening, viewers. Great to be on CKC again.
Great to have you again as well, Lyndon. And as you can see, we've got the festive vibe going on the channel. I'm not really the one to do all these extra small things on the channel, but seeing that it's this time of the year, it's my first time actually. Actually as a streamer during the festive, so why not? So we're gonna keep the festive spirits up with some interesting end games. Welcome to everybody in the chat box. Hi, Dolph. Hi, Grey Old Wizard. Hi, Pat Lee. Dolph says, "Isn't this position from?" And Dolph has got a good sense over here. I don't know if he read the names at the top of and the bottom of the board, but Dolph seems to know this one. Yes, this is actually one of the games that they say is in the top 100 most famous games. And we're actually going to start off with something very interesting that Dolph has sensed here. So Lyndon, this is our first position before you carry on with your personally selected games. This is maybe one of the most famous king marches, and that's our theme for the evening. So can you tell us a bit more?
Yes, thanks, Calvin. Just hold on. Okay, so Calvin, tonight the theme that I've selected for our first Lyndon lecture series is actually king marches. And one always hears that the king has to stay at home, the king must be defended, the king shouldn't be moving forward. But what I have found is that if you have a sense as a player when to move your king, the king can actually be a fighting piece. Now, I used to study the great games of Steinitz, I used to study Tal, all of those guys, and they often used to say that the king is nearly worth a full piece in the end game. And the king, if you use him correctly, can become an extra fighting piece as well. And this is the position that the viewers can see is in fact the very famous position of Short versus Jan Timman. It was played in Tilburg, a famous Dutch town, and of course a great tournament that you often, Kasparov, them all played in Tilburg. And this game was played in 1991, nearly 30 years ago, Calvin. And the game today is, in fact, as you said, one of those top 100 games. And I use it to start off because I saw the game at that time, because it was so famous. Yeah. All the newspapers carried it. And I decided I would like to start with it tonight, Calvin.
Okay, fantastic, Lyndon. And I think it's a great way to start the session, because both of these players, with myself growing up in the early stages, I remember Jan Timman. There's one game that is stuck in my brain. Of course, Kasparov being my favorite of all time growing up. He was playing against Karpov, and there was this one King's Indian game that Kasparov played against Jan Timman. And from then on, I also noticed that Timman was one of the best in the world. And of course, we all know Nigel for being also in the top for a very long time, also challenging Kasparov for the world title at some point. But just something for the viewers as well. If you do know this game and you know the answers, maybe I would suggest to make it still a bit exciting for the rest of the viewers and do not spoil it with a answer. So if you have seen this game, then yes, just sit on your hands for a moment over there and let the viewers maybe contemplate a bit. Okay, the theme of this evening can sometimes also assist us with our thinking, but I think we can start off with this position, Lyndon. So just maybe to give a small intro here into this position right here, or maybe let's just analyze here the last move played. Black played pawn to h5, and that was basically a reply from white playing h4. White wants to go h5 and perhaps h6 and just go for mate. So black's having seen this. Okay, my arrows don't want to go away. Let's manually take them away. Responds with h5. And if you look at all of black's pieces, they not so happy. They stuck defending. So But the question is, sometimes in a game you look so good, you're winning, but sometimes to realize the win, that's another thing. So what to
Yeah.
do?
Well, in fact, Calvin, if one analyzes the position even further, so the position started off, it was Alekine's defense, the Albert variation that Short played. Short, in fact, challenged Kasparov 2 years later in '93 for the PCA World Championship. And but what was important is that Short was playing probably the chess of his life, because Short beat Timman and he beat Karpov in order to get to that
Wow.
match against Kasparov. Of course, at the Olympiad in 1992, in which I competed, Kasparov was asked in an interview, who is going to be your opponent at the World Championship? And he said, my opponent will be Short and the match will be short.
Yes, I remember that one. Yeah, that's very
So
interesting.
that was Short.
Kasparov being funny.
But Nigel was certainly in the top five in the world in the period 91 to 94. Obviously, we all remember players like Ivanchuk and Anand coming through at that stage. But now, once we get to this position, you'll notice that the queen is entrenched on f6. The queen cannot be dislodged from f6. Now, the reason for the pawn to h4 is, of course, h5, h6 would be mate immediately and can't be stopped.
Yeah,
it's on the dark squares, everything. And at the same time, if h5 gets played and something captures on g6, the rook is already on the 7th rank. So those are all the plus points for white. And of course, the rook on d4 prevents queen e4 and queen f5. So that the rook on d4 plays a very, very important role. And of course, the knight on f3 stops the mate on g2. So that's my analysis, Calvin, of the situation. Firstly, just from there, and of course, as you said, the black pieces are stuck behind. But now there's a famous book called Attacking Chess, and you have one by Colin Crouch, and then you also have The Art of Attack that was written by one of the famous Russian authors, Vukovic. And in that book, they normally would say that you need 3 pieces to give mate.
Yes.
Now, in this case, there's already a queen and there's already a rook on d7. So that's maybe 2 pieces.
Yes.
But now you need a 3rd piece. So Calvin, the question is, what would that 3rd piece be for you in this position?
Yes, and nice intro there, Lyndon. And just by the way, welcome to Dion Pick. Mr. Pick is in the house. He says, hi, Calvinator and the Accumulator. Good to have Mr. Pick in the building. And then Not Pole already suggested a move here, Lyndon. Not Pole is suggesting queen to g5 with a question mark. Is queen to g5 an option? Dolph says Art of Attack is a great book. I think Art of Attack is from Jan Timman, if I'm correct.
There's also a book by Jan Timman as well, but also I was more thinking about the older Russian one, but certainly Timman's books on chess, The Art of Analysis, all of those ones. He's just a fantastic writer. Even his book called Studies and Puzzles, also a fantastic book. And people underestimate Jan Timman, but actually one of the top 5 players at that time of the world. Calvin, queen g5 wouldn't be such a great move, because your queen is lying on f6. Your queen is already in a strong position.
Yes.
So once you have your pieces in a strong position, the question that you must always ask, now you have a Dvoretsky, Mark Dvoretsky, who passed away 2 to 3 years ago, and then he would ask a question, and then you also had Dorfman, one of his students. Dorfman, in fact, also used to ask, what piece is not participating or well positioned?
Yes.
And that is the question that I want the viewers to look at tonight. What could possibly assist the queen on f6 to give mate in a manner that we described earlier on? So perhaps if we put the queen back to f6, Calvin,
just a second, Lyndon. So Dolph also saying, it is their old book, the red book. But just to answer queen g5, perhaps with a counter question to Not Pole, what would be the idea with queen g5? Just like Lyndon said, the queen is placed pretty well on f6, very close to the king. If you can maybe back it up with an idea, where's the queen going to h6, but will the queen really be threatening anything alone? Just notice that one thing that we must notice is our opponent's our opponent's pieces, and these two guys on c6 and b7 are kind of restricting the knight on f3. So if you would play queen h6 and knight g5, you might get mated on g2. So maybe not Paul, if you can suggest why queen g5, then we can have a look at it. But right now, it just seems like you're playing the queen a bit back. And not Paul says mating threat refutes it. Never mind. No worries, not Paul. I really appreciate you suggesting moves over there, and I would encourage the viewers to do so. So thanks a lot, not Paul, for the suggestion. We are here to learn and make mistakes and improve. So yeah. So Lyndon, I'm gonna hand it over to you again. But just before that, when Dolph says, sorry to ask, if you were playing the black side of this, what would you do? My idea is he needs to try to force some trades. Yeah, that would be nice, but how do you enforce trades? That's the question. So,
Yeah.
and just coming back to what Lyndon was saying, and I think this is a key principle for almost any time of the game, if you don't know what you're doing. And in fact, certain books say it's this principle, other books say it's another principle, just name-wise. But I think that's one of the most important principles in chess as well, attacking. Like Lyndon said, what piece is doing nothing, guys?
And Calvin, thanks. That's actually the key question. And in fact, Dolph there has some good ideas. And in fact, in this position, the last move in this position was pawn to h5 for black. And so once you start asking yourself these questions, how's my pawn structure? Can I improve that any further? You can't, because the pawns are already well positioned. Your pieces, they are well positioned on the 7th and on d4 and knight f3, queen f6. So once you've started to analyze what the threats are, you know that the queen is threatening on g2 check, but you also know that if a pawn or a piece could land on h6, mate is inevitable on g7. And Nigel Short, realizing this, played a very important move, and he played king h2.
Okay.
So king h2 was now played, and all of a sudden, the idea now becomes apparent. Short, in broad daylight, wants to have a king march, Calvin.
Well, I was going to say, Lyndon, maybe it's not that apparent yet for the viewers. Maybe after the next move, because king h2 can always also sometimes look like a either like an automatic move, a safe move, or even just a lazy move if you don't know what to do. So
well, that is true. That is true. The king moves to h2, doesn't yet reveal his intentions.
Yes, but
and of course, he's got an intention
yes,
that we know.
Yes,
So
you're
black,
right.
Black of course has to make some moves now. And Dolph is not far off with the idea of bishop c8, perhaps just attacking the rook on that side, because of course it's important to try to get that rook off there. But the key question is, when you're defending, Calvin, your defense has to be so accurate, because one mistake and it's all over. So defense is still a very important aspect, as well as Dolph is saying here. So let's look at what what black played in this position.
So black played the rook to c8.
Yeah.
So the question is, what happens after bishop c8, though, the move that Dolph was suggesting?
I think I would have understood that he would have probably played rook d8 or rook e7 or something like that, just to obviously get out there, because the rook doesn't have a real square to return to.
Now, that would be an interesting move, Lyndon, but we do have some annotations here that we can use as well. And there's some very, very nice suggestions here. Okay, so first of all, what Lyndon suggested was a rook d8. But of course, naturally, you don't want to swap off. But in this case, black maybe can't swap off everything after rook d8, takes. And if black captures another time, then of course, there's issues with the bishop on c8. But maybe black can say, we'll keep it like this for the moment. I'm not sure. Rook d8 still looks menacing, because we have a threat of takes on f8 and perhaps queen h8 check, picking up the bishop. Black might have to play the bishop back to b7 or something like this. But if we look at the position a bit longer, I don't know, can anybody suggest something else here, or just take a second here to think a bit? This looks very interesting, what I'm looking at. So maybe one drawback, maybe we should ask ourselves, what's a drawback of Bishop C8? What is the drawback? Because the bishop was placed quite well on B7, guys. Let's see. Patley says the art of attack by Vukovic, question mark. And Wimdolf says, yeah, it is Vukovic. Boom Shaka says, good evening, gents. Welcome, Boom Shaka. So, guys, what's the drawback of Bishop C8? I think the drawback is these two guys are not threatening a mate over there on G2 anymore.
Yeah. In fact, the knight is now free to move.
The knight's also free to move, yes.
The knight can go to G5, and then, of course, there's even the very interesting opportunity of pawn to G4.
Yes, and in fact, with our annotations, G4 is the suggested move right now. Brilliant. So G4 and what is going to happen here? So they give pawn takes G4, but let's see. Bishop takes D7. What's happening over here? Are we going to play pawn takes pawn?
Well, Calvin, there's a whole lot of issues there, but the
threatening H6.
Threatening H6 immediately.
Yeah, I think that's, oh yeah. In fact, it is part of the analysis. I didn't even see that. G takes and there's so much pressure here. H6 is a huge threat. The king is stuck. The rooks are in the way. And after G takes H5, Queen G5 check. And yeah, it's going to be over soon. So the idea is to remove the pawn from H5 with check, and then eventually the rook will swing over for mate. Beautiful.
Yep, that's right. That's
just to show the viewers, King H7 check over here, and after King G7, even Rook G4 is immediately mate. That's a beautiful variation. And if instead of takes, if King H7, we're gonna get back to the main line now. King H7, then Knight G5 check. The knight actually does a lot of damage, and then we can play H6 next. So yeah. Okay. So that's why not Bishop C8 Wimdolf, but it does take a bit of energy from white to convince. But Rook D8 was also quite interesting there by Lyndon. So Rook C8 played in the game?
Yeah, Rook C8 played in the game. So of course, Timon, I'm assuming that Timon, as a top super grandmaster at the time, he may have just underestimated the idea that short had now.
Yeah.
And Calvin, let's look at what the next move for white is.
So the next move is a shocker, yes, if you haven't seen the game before. So
yeah, so let's and there is King G3. Now this is a very unusual move, because you said King H2, maybe a lazy move, maybe just a move to put your king casually to the side of the board, not to allow a back rank mate if ever there was one in the air. But here the king is announcing itself in the middle of the battle. The queens are on the board, both rooks are there, and there's a bishop, which means that there's a lot of piece play. The king simply decides that it will announce itself on G3. And this is the equivalent, Calvin, of the king going in front of the pieces.
I was going to say now, Lyndon, it's almost like those war movies where the king, when the king joins the army, he's inspiring the soldiers. And in this, he's leading by example. And maybe to the viewers out there, if we give you guys a few seconds, can you guys tell us what's the plan? Is white just being unnecessarily fancy here? Or what is the direct plan that Nigel Short had in mind? What is the gem of idea that he used in this game? Why King G3? Anybody in the chat box want to give a suggestion? This is beautiful, especially because it's a middle game. You don't see the kings wandering around. So, and by the way, black the white's queen side pawn structure is ruined. The A4 pawn is even hanging.
Yeah.
So black can wander off, but there is no real there's nothing real to the queen side right now. It's all about the kings, and if black wanders too far, he might just get mated faster. And we have some suggestions in the chat. Not Paul is saying King F4. Patley just enhances or furthers that idea with King H6. So Water Dodo says the plan is to get the king to G6 question mark. Maybe not G6 because G6 is protected. I think you mean H6. Yes, that's right. So the guys are all on point, and yes, the plan is to go King F4, King G5, and King H6, guys. This is beautiful. So King G3, what did black play?
And let's see, Timon has to come up very, very quickly, and of course he now moves to the original position.
It's not a good sign.
That we started off 20 minutes ago, and of course the difference now is the king is lying on G3 and not G1.
Yes.
So in other words, there's a tempo and another tempo. So now you are tempi. All of these things. Bit of Latin there, Calvin.
You know what, Lyndon? I just thought of something funny. If I was maybe playing a blitz game or a bullet game, maybe one of my first instincts would be to play King H2 just to make sure the king is safe in this position.
Yeah. Well, but I think
that's what makes this game so interesting.
It's a normal reaction to keep the king safe. But this is where the grandmaster's thought patterns come in. The grandmaster Nigel Short has seen the idea, and he decides he's going to go for it. And I mean, that's what makes this game so beautiful. Let's look at the next move, Calvin.
King to F4.
What a beautiful move.
Beautiful.
King F4. And the king is simply doing a king march. The king G1 to H2 to G3 to F4, and he's simply announcing himself. He's not doing much, and of course, king H7 is not possible because then F7 is not defended.
Yeah.
So the knight can go to G5, check, and then triple on the F7 pawn.
Yes.
All of those things are possible now, and all that black can do is to wait.
Yeah, and you don't often see top super GMs just being strangled like this. It's beautiful. And of course, just to mention, guys, you can't always do a king march. Of course, you need to evaluate if it's a safe, it's safe to do so with your king, with the position being very locked, possible. So after King F4, Black went finally Bishop C8, Wimdolf's idea. But after Bishop C8, we just complete the idea.
Yep, please complete the idea there, Calvin.
King to G5 and resignation. G5.
And of course, the resignation is a good one. I had a friend in PE, Yanni Safir. He used to say resignation is also a move.
Yeah. Yes.
So in this case, King H6 can't be stopped, and then the king is aiding in attacking the opposite king.
Beautiful stuff, and the guys in the chat also spotted it. Not Paul said, I feel like Bishop C8 can be ignored. Well spotted. Wimdolf said, well, the idea now is no G4. Now, okay, maybe G4 is an idea, but the king was just marching to victory. After King G4, just to show the viewers out there, after Bishop takes, King H6 would complete the idea of King H2, King G3. Wow. Queen G7 mate is unstoppable. Beautiful.
And what a march, Calvin. And if you look very carefully, basically the only thing that differed in that position was the bishop is not on B7 but on D7, and the white king just zigzagged its way to H6 on that side. So a brilliant game by Nigel Short will forever be remembered. I mean, the king march, and for people who don't know, Nigel Short, of course, was the South African champion in 2015, having won the title here in Cape Town. In fact, in the last round, he drew with Wateko Bese on board 1. But Nigel Short, also a South African champion as well amongst his accolades.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Yeah, I think I played in that one as well. It was good to have Nigel here. Okay, so that was a nice intro, Lyndon. So what are we looking at next?
Calvin, we're going to look at the game that I played back in 1994. The game is against Howard Goldberg. And Dion Pick, I'm glad that you're on board, because Dion Pick was also in that particular tournament. He and I drew, in fact, our individual match, and we're going to go to the position after move 23, after 23. Bishop takes A8. Yeah, after Bishop takes A8. That's it. So we'll pause there for the moment. So Calvin, before I give my intro, this game, just to tell you, was the trials for the South African Olympic team to go to Moscow 4 months later.
Okay, and this was 1994, you said?
1994. 1994. I was a young man at the time, Calvin. I had just turned 21, and I was playing Howard Goldberg. And this match was probably still one of the round 6 or 7. So it was still early days, because, of course, in those years, Calvin, we were 14 players, and it was a 13-round event. Cool. So every game counted. Calvin, I'm playing black in this position. What is your analysis?
Okay, let's have a look. So, it sounds like a nice scene over there with the tournament and everything. Nowadays, it's 12 players in SA closed. But first thing that I can pick up from this is, okay, if you count quickly, always we should just take stock of what's happening. Pawns seem even, knight and bishop on the board. But if you look at the pawn structure, then the bishop on G2 might not be the best piece on the board. So always take that into consideration, guys. The pawn structure will tell us a lot in the position. Obviously, the bishop on A8 doesn't look too happy right now, but at some point, the bishop can enter maybe a c4 break eventually. But if you compare the a8 bishop to the g2 bishop, black is definitely better in that regard. And then the other thing, black of course has more space, which is also a very important factor, which at this moment tells me that the knight on b2 is not happy as well. The knight can't find good squares. The knight on b2, actually looking at it now, looks horrible because he can't get to a4, can't get to c4, can't go to d3. If he goes to d1, where to from d1? Can't go to c3 or e3. You might have to go. It almost looks like that bad knight in that some is it Benoni or King's Indian positions where you go knight c6 and knight a5 in that variation of the Panov. But it seems like white has got two bad minor pieces. Comparing that knight to the knight on e7, he's got lots of potential. Knight c6, knight b4. And yeah, black definitely better for choice here. That's my analysis. So yeah.
Calvin, let's pause there for a moment. So yes, Calvin, you've done an excellent a bit of analysis there. Now I also noticed something else in this position that I was playing for the win. Yes. I felt that I could take this guy, and you know, in an essay closed, every point counts. You gotta play your utmost. So you gotta play that 5-hour matches, that 6-hour matches, doesn't matter. You must play it.
Yeah.
And you know, for the younger players out there that's watching the show tonight, you must play out the end games. You mustn't just draw. You must play out the end games because your opponent can make a mistake. Now, I noticed, Calvin, something interesting. I was asking myself, what will happen if my king on g7 could possibly go to c3? Because I can go via a5, b4. And if he places his king on d2, I could possibly invade. So let's look what happens now in the next few moves, Calvin. So let's play a few moves for black.
Okay, so king to f1. By the way,
white has to play.
By the way, yeah, white played king f1. Dr. Queenie says, "Good evening, everyone. Welcome, Dr. Queenie." Pat Lee says, "F5 is my suggestion to exchange bishops and to put the black knight to b4." So that would be a bit counter to what we were saying, Pat Lee, because we said that the bishop on g2 is worse than the bishop on a8. So playing f5 and exchanging off, that would relieve white a bit. So that's what I think that would take away some of your advantage.
And also I think Patrick Patrick, welcome from Mauritius. It's great that Patrick Lee Ying is joining us from Mauritius.
Oh, it's Patrick. Okay.
Patrick,
okay.
Yes, Patrick has played there for Mauritius over 100 times at the Olympiad.
Welcome.
And great having him on board. But Calvin, what I wanted to say was that I felt that I first wanted to position my king before I move anything. So let's look at a few quick moves. King f8, king e1, king e8, bishop f1, king d7. We quickly bishop e2, king c6, king d2, king b6.
And this king has made a beautiful run from g7. Look at the path, guys.
Yep.
Look at this path.
Yep.
Wow.
So you see, so all of a sudden, you have to imagine that you must play on both sides of the board. The king was standing with g7 literally 7-8 moves ago, but all of a sudden the king is now coming to invade on the queen side. And that is very important because the king is a fighting piece. The king has to come into play. Let's look at what so f3, Calvin, because you pointed out the knight on d1 has no square. So the knight has to go to f2 in order to create some play. So at the same time, Calvin, you pointed out earlier, the bishop on a8 now is asking some serious questions. What is its role in life? And of course, it has to come into play. So bishop c6.
Bishop c6. By the way, welcome to King Ulster. King Ulster says, evening all, wonderful theme and opener. Thanks, King Ulster. Dolph also noticing the pawns are on the same color. Yes, Dolph, that's very important. So bishop c6, getting the bishop into the game. Knight f2, white desperately trying to activate his knight.
Right, and then bishop d7. So the bishop now comes to cover that critical square there, g4, and I think, Patrick, this is where you'll notice that black hasn't moved any pawns yet. Black is only moving his pieces because the pawns are doing such wonderful jobs that they don't need to be moved at this stage.
Yes.
So white now played pawn to f4.
And just to show to the viewers, white could have been in a hurry to activate the knight that was poorly placed on the queen side, but this is now a very instructive moment where black can actually, okay, doesn't seem, okay, black has a couple of options. Black can play knight c6, or black can go bishop takes knight on g4. And I would tend to play the next move very quickly, which is bishop takes g4. Just take the knight.
Yeah.
And the reason for that
Yeah.
is maybe we can play f6 first, just to stop that pawn from reaching g5 and stopping all of our
Yeah.
pawns. But here we see another theme, guys, is the good knight versus the bad bishop. We spoke about this bishop being bad, and earlier on, if we played f5 and swapped off that potentially bad bishop, then this would not be a possibility. Now we have a situation where all the pawns are on the light squares, of a lot of them. The bishop is not really happy, and the knight and king can now really dance around on the dark squares at their leisure. So that's another possibility there. And I guess that's why white plays f4 in this position, trying to open up for the bishop.
It's very interesting. King also is asking, was this inspirational or dreaming, view? But I think this was because I wanted to come into the SA team, into the SA Olympic team for the second time. And I decided that every game I'm going to play, I'm playing all out. And that is why equal position, we're going to play it out. And that is what I'm doing here. I'm playing out, in theory, an equal position because material is equal, but I believe black has a positional advantage. So that's what I'm playing. I'm playing to get my full point and not a half a point. So
Yes.
so when pawn f4 was played, I thought, okay, he's opening up, but doesn't this give me an opportunity to play, Calvin, king b4?
King to b4 on the board.
Because all of a sudden, I'm controlling that square on c3, which is what I wanted. Because I calculated that he played now pawn takes pawn. So yeah, he's capturing the e5 pawn. But knight c6 is fine.
You're gaining a beautiful square if you can capture. Knight on e5.
Beautiful squares being gained immediately, and of course that knight will then be able to make use of that square to jump to f3, g4, or wherever it needs to be at a later stage.
Also so support c4, yeah. Okay.
Very important, very important.
All
so
right.
Let's look at white played. Bishop g4, of course, you can't exchange because then the knight would be defending that pawn on that side. So capture.
And white finally gets rid of his bad bishop.
Yep.
But now you've already made inroads with your king. Knight to h3 was played.
So in this position, the two knights now. Let's just play black's next move, Calvin. Knight e5.
Sorry, Lyndon, I just want to show the viewers here. Okay, so you played knight e5 with a beautiful square, but why did white not go knight g4 and stop this from happening? Simply.
But h5 just would throw the knight back and then go on to e5 immediately.
And then we can reach that. So just to show over there, that's the reason why white cannot keep the knight out. So white instead plays knight h3, knight to e5, beautiful square for the knight.
And if we pause here for a moment, we now see the difference between the two pieces. A knight on the rim is dim. A knight on the rim is grim. Those are all those lovely axioms that they used to talk to you at school. And at the same time, the knight on e5, remember, can go to 8 squares, whereas a knight on h3 can logically only go to about 4 squares. And in this case, it's not looking good because knight f3 check is in fact being threatened.
And the h2 pawn is hanging.
H2 pawn is hanging.
Just a question. Just a question from Dolph. He was asking, can white perhaps not push e5 and sacrifice the pawn just to get the knight on e4? Okay, the e4 square is not permanent because we cannot play f5 at some point, but it's an idea. I mean, if you don't want to be squeezed completely, but I don't see the long-term benefit here. I mean, is a knight f3 check still immediately available?
Yeah.
Something like that, I think, would already be a problem. 2 pawns down. If the knight on e4 moves, we can always go king c3 as well. So maybe not at that moment, Dolph.
Yeah.
Okay, so knight h3, knight e5. So how does white stop this idea of knight f3 check?
Knight g1 is now forced.
Well,
so
that's
the
a sad
knight
move.
has to go back to its initial square in order just to stop. And I thought a bit about this position, Calvin. Now, I felt that everything is well positioned, and I'm now going to stop the pawn on h2 from moving. So I decided g5.
Okay, and that's a very important theme actually in endgames, is to fix these weaknesses. H2 is a problem for white, so we don't want the problem to run away. So if for instance, if we do something else, white could play H3 or even H4 and try to get rid of that weakness. So G5, very nice. I like it, Lennon, because now you could potentially play G4 and that pawn on H2,
Yes,
even fixing
that's right.
both pawns with one pawn.
Yes. So the one pawn G4
Nice.
also allow knight F3 check in some lines,
Aha.
because once the pawn on C2 falls, then of course D3 and B3 will fall automatically as well. Because remember, Nimzowitsch talked about the base of the pawn chain. In this case, the base of the pawn chain is the pawn on C2.
Yes.
If the pawn falls, then of course the whole pawn structure falls. So G5, important little endgame move. One
Nice.
pawn stops, as you said. So that's a move there.
Okay, G5, nice. White played H3 to stop that idea.
To stop there, and of course, black now persists because there's an extra move, H5, and now black is running. Black is running there, and now white is in a bit of a zugzwang, because white now has to move his king, and which he does, and white now moves his king back to D1. Now, Kelvin, this is an important juncture in the game, and you know, sometimes one can sit pretty on a move, on a position, and not know what to do with it.
Yeah.
But it is very important to know that the end position is you're going for the win. So you've got to look at what needs to be done slowly. And what I decided to do is that in my in-game studies, the player with a pawn break is normally the one with the initiative. And in this case, I felt that it is now time for the pawn break. And that is why black's next move is pawn to c4.
Pawn to c4, aha, the time is ripe and the king is ready also to enter. Just notice, guys, if you maybe play king c3, maybe knight e2 can nudge the king a bit away. And the c4 break with a d4 pawn hanging could not be played so easily. Yeah. So c4, maybe the timing is perfect here. So we are threatening the pawn on d3 and on b3. And yes, I agree with you. I think it was, who was it? Arthur Yusupov or someone that said that flexibility in your pawn structure is key. If you don't have pawn breaks, then you're in trouble. So pawn to c4. And white needs to get rid of this pressure. So he captures. Captures.
Capture.
And now the question, now, what to do? So in the game, white played takes, but now my question is, what if white just plays king d2 or something?
Well, Calvin, that is the interesting thing. So if he decides to go there, then you in fact have a move like g4.
Just tying the screws in even more here. So let's say white goes h4, for instance.
Now remember, you also still have a pawn move like f6, eh?
F6.
You remember, yes. So black
got lots of moves.
There's still lots of moves on that side of the board, and also in some instances, do you play pawn takes pawn and king b3 to come in, and then of course you also have this, perhaps f6 at some stage just to keep the tension.
And there's another idea. I'm also looking at c3 check and then putting the king on b2, and I mean, and then knight f3 check. So I don't know if the knight goes to e2. If white, if we play, let's say just for instance, check, king there, the knight goes to there. Okay, but then the knight reaches this square. Maybe we don't want that. Maybe I'm dreaming a bit too far here. Maybe that's not necessary. But all of these things, maybe even check potentially immediately. But I think you've got it there. Takes over there, or even f6. Just waiting a bit to see what white is gonna do. It seems winning. You must just time it, I guess.
Time it. Well, in this case, in many cases, Calvin, these endgames are also played with both players short of time. Because if you look at it's already move 42. It has been a long game, so the players have taken their time. But in this case, the player playing white, Howard Goldberg, a very capable player, decided to, of course, now play pawn takes pawn,
like the c4?
and king takes, and then. What was our next move? Knight e2. So I decided, you know what? I needed to get to the king side now. The king has done what it needed to do on the queen side. It's now time for us to go to the king side. And in this case, the pawn move, pawn to d3 was now called for. And now it's the pawn, we're breaking now that the king is coming forward. And of course, he's got to decide, he plays check, and then the king takes. So now you see a very active king, because
Yes.
the white king is now on d1, and that black king is now on d3, and that black king has a potential to march. Now, at this stage, two players came into the hall, because this game was the last one that was being played. Antonio Brevetti and Michailakis. George Michailakis, of course, one of the players with the highest rating in South Africa at 24.99 at the time. He came to watch this end game. So, I was also looking at him, because George had just ended third in the World Junior 1 year before this event. So, they can obviously see things as well. And in this position, white played king e1. And Calvin, I took a bit of time, about 2 to 3 minutes, because of course that pawn on e4 is now vulnerable.
Yes.
But Calvin, this is not drafts. You don't have to capture.
It is tempting. Your natural instinct is to capture the pawn, but of course you need to look at your options. So
I decided that pawn on e4 was more a hindrance for white than actually an advantage to capture it. And in this case, I now played king e3. And George and Antonio, after the game, said that move surprised them. And then they realized that I had an understanding of this position, because the pawn on e4 would have been a good square for the knight to jump into at some stage. But now with the pawn on e4, the pawn is a hindrance, and the knight on e5 is well placed in this position.
And so of course, your king is also just taking a position, stopping the white king from joining his pawns. King f2 maybe was also something that white would want to do. I think that's a brilliant move. King e3.
So king e3, and then of course white now played knight c3 to defend the pawn, and of course the king continues with its march to f3, and then the knight jumps back, and then of course that pawn on e4 is still there. But of course we ignore that pawn. That pawn is not going anywhere, my friends. So king g2.
Wow, nice.
That's the move. Pawn to h4, and now pawn to f6.
So we invite the white to capture on g5, so that we have an outside pass pawn possibility.
Not only an outside pass pawn, Calvin, but a knight cannot stop a rook pawn.
Yes.
Very, very difficult for a knight to stop a rook pawn. So as soon as he captures, then pawn to h4 runs.
Yes.
And then of course that black h pawn will become very, very strong. So in this case, king d2, and black now played king f2, still restricting, because if you look carefully, the knight on d3, the knight on e5 stops the king from going to d3, and black stops the king from going to e3.
Yes, so the king can't move.
So the king has to now find a move. The king has to find a move.
What? So king d1, very sad to play for white. White is the only move, because the knight on e2 has to still hold g3. So king d1.
Yep. And then king f3, and now something has to give. And he plays knight
c3.
to c3, and then king takes.
Finally,
knight d5. Knight d5. He goes for it. Pawn takes pawn. Knight takes h3. Knight h5. King h4, and you can't stop.
Okay, because knight f4, h2, and then the knight can't do anything. Nice. Wow. Your king worked a lot in this game. From the one side to the other side and back to the other side. With temptations there as well along the way.
Calvin, temptations along the way. But what I wanted to illustrate to the viewers is that this king went from g7 to f8, e8, d7, c6, b6, a5, b4. If you just trace it there with your arrow, right through c6, it went to c6 now, b6, a5, b4, c3, in fact c4, d, and then ended up on h4 after making some moves there. So this was an active king in the true sense of the word, Calvin.
I think that was basically the difference, Lyndon, in this game between drawing and winning, perhaps. Yeah, I think that's a very important lesson that everybody must take from this. Everybody that's still fresh to the game, or you're struggling with end games, the key is so valuable, and Lyndon basically showed in this game beautifully that the king. I mean, the king was worth so much, and he did everything for you in this game. So beautiful, well done, well played.
No, thanks, Calvin. So for me, this game was one of the games that helped me to get into the SA Olympic team. In that particular SA closed, out of 13 games, I scored 6 draws, 6 wins, and 1 loss. So that was my score. Out of 13, I scored 9 points,
Great
which
stuff.
for SA
True.
close is a lot of points.
Great stuff.
In fact,
King,
as well.
King also says, gives a comment here. King also says, end-game subtleties. The king was a long-distance runner. Yes, indeed.
Well,
So, yeah.
Calvin, in fact, the king was a very long distance runner. And the next game that I'm going to show the viewers now, Calvin, is a game that I played in Johannesburg. It was played at the Commonwealth Championship, and it was played against one of our local boys, Bernard Klein. And in fact, we're going to go to, let's just see which position we're going to start off. Calvin, we're going to start off at position move 23.
23. Bishop B2.
Yeah, let's just go there. Yeah. So we're going to play fast through some of the middle game in order to get to the end game. But let's just set the scene, Calvin. Commonwealth Championship, first time it's being held in South Africa, in Johannesburg, Emperor's Palace. I traveled up and I stayed at Birchwood. And when you're far from home, it means that when it comes to chess, you're going to play now. So I decided that come what may, I'm here to play this game right up until the end. So even if it means sitting, as we did for 6 hours, we're going to sit. So this game, we had exchanged a lot of pieces, as you can see. And Calvin, let's ask your expert advice. I'm playing white, Klein is black. What is your analysis of this position?
Okay, so I see white has just played bishop b2. Let's take stock of the material. Seems even. White's got 2 bishops and a knight. Black's got 2 knights and a bishop. Each has got a rook on the board. And okay, white's got more space. It looks like a typical French defense structure. But so you should. I was gonna say sometimes it can be a Caro-Kann as well. Seeing notice that black doesn't have his notorious bad French bishop on the board, so yes. But in the structure, white has more space, but sometimes this d4 pawn can be a weakness that white needs to defend. On the other hand, the positive side of white's structure is he still has this f5 break. Even late in the end game, that could be possible to generate play. Looking at the rooks, let's evaluate the 2 rooks. The rook on h8 seems to be in the corner, but he has some potential of maybe knocking on h4's door. So white just needs to be careful. Perhaps bishop f3 will just cut that completely, and king g2 and so on. So doesn't seem like the rook is too happy on h8. Compared to the rook on f1, there's a huge open file on the c file. So perhaps white has the potential of generating play on the c file. The bishop on h1, a technically good bishop, but not yet in the game. So he's gonna have to take some time to get into the game. The knight on e2 holding everything together, but he's gonna have to maneuver a bit. I would say the piece that is most concerning for white would be the bishop on b2. He needs to find a way to get into the game. Looking at the structure, yet again, the fixed pawns, the bishop on b2, either exchange or if he's a key defender. But we need to find something for him. Black's pieces on the other side. The knight on a5 doesn't look too happy right now because he can't enter. Black would love to enter or put pressure on d4 pawn and maybe get a knight to b4 perhaps. So his pieces seem jumbled up here. h8, f8, e7. So maybe the knights will have to come into play. The bishop on f8. Seems like this b4 square is critical for black to somehow. His knights want to go there. His bishop want to go there. His king is going to have to get to d7. So it's an interesting battle right now. It seems about even, but I don't know about the dynamics here. Rook can go to c1 quick. And white has some potential with f5. But it looks pretty balanced. And I'd like to see what's going to happen next.
So Calvin, you are right. Everything is pretty balanced. I think it's again that question of the will to win. and whether or not we're going to play it out.
Yeah.
And this was one of those tournaments where I had actually made that decision prior to the tournament. We're going to play it out. So whatever happens, Lyndon is not going to draw quickly, and blood must flow.
Just
So,
Lyndon, thanks, and just an interesting comment here by Patrick, a very interesting one. He's foreseeing some stuff. I don't know if that's what happened in the game, but he says exchange the rooks, and the white king is eyeing a trip to a6. Interesting idea, Patrick.
That's an interesting idea as well, but let's see how things develop.
Yeah.
So lots of minor pieces still on the board. So I'm gonna talk about some of the things quickly, and then we're gonna stop at some critical positions.
All right.
So Calvin, the next move, black plays, of course, is knight on e7 to c6.
Yeah.
And as you said, the square b4 is a critical one. But what was interesting for me is that two pieces want to be on b4. The knight and the bishop.
Yeah.
But they both can't be on b4. So, there's a famous chapter in one of Dovetsky's book, The Superfluous Knight, when you have both knights contesting for the square on d5. And in this case, one of black's pieces can only occupy b4. So it's an interesting one. And of course, that is a weakness in this case. And Calvin, white now played knight c1 because, of course, the knight covers a2, covers b3, and all of those things. So at the moment, players, you first need to consolidate. Before you do anything exciting, you just need to consolidate your position first and just see where you're going as well, because you can't have your bishop on h1. It has to come into play, reposition your pieces, and see where the squares are the most optimal. Yeah. So let us see how both players understood this, because Klein is a very capable player, and black played bishop b4 coming into play, because if you look very carefully, he's threatening bishop d2, bishop check on e3, and suddenly the d4 pawn is hanging. Yeah. So you got to be very careful with with guys like Klein. And of course, in this case, rook f2, just stopping that. And then of course, Klein just comes in, bishop e1, attacks. And of course, rook e2 just poses the question, because now you notice that the rook is also well placed. And if you notice carefully, I'm trying to position the rook on a light square. Yeah. So that there's no issues on the dark squares as well, right? So bishop b4 moves, bishop f3. So the bishop has to come into play, freeing the king, of course, and just putting g4, a little defender on g4, because as you pointed out, Calvin, rook h4 will come at some stage. Yeah. Right? Bishop e7. Bishop e7. The bishop now moves back to its natural square. Yeah. And allows knight b4 to also come in, and now the king moves to g2. So this is the thing that I've learned from my study of the grandmasters, is the square h3 was a potential weakness for me, because the rook could always penetrate to h3. Yes. So I need to make sure that I cover those things, so the king plays an important role, and also the king can later on go to g3 as well. So the black has to activate his king, Calvin, king d7.
And here finally a3 gets played.
A3. So a3 is now played. A3 now just takes into account that that queen side and covers the b4 as well. So just a little move, but an important one, because you can't have your queen side being attacked the whole time. So let's see what happens now.
Pawn to b5.
Pawn to b5. Yeah. A rook e3.
Pawn to b4.
And now Klein plays b4, which I don't think is a great move. But he indicated that he wanted to pin the weakness on b3, so that one of my pieces is always there defending it. So I again looked at it, okay, that's fine, but now I'm closing up the queen side. I'm going to close up the queen side immediately, which I now did with pawn to a4. So now he always needs to have a knight badly positioned on a5, in my opinion, in order to attack the weakness in my position, which is b3. Yeah. But at the moment, I've got two pieces covering that, so I'm okay. I'm following the Nimzowitsch principle of overprotecting. So one piece is there, and the knight on a5 is not the greatest piece in the world. So that's fine. He plays bishop d8. I reposition now. The next move, Calvin, for white.
Bishop d1.
I'm just following that overprotection principle. That's a third piece defending the weakness
Yes.
now as well, but it also frees up my other pieces, right?
Bishop
So let's
B6.
continue.
It's the D4
Bishop
pawn.
B6. Now he comes in, and I've seen that knight E2 has to come in, and then he goes rook H4. So you can see both players, white and black, they're attacking and of course defending where necessary, but both players are playing active chess.
Yes, and here comes an interesting moment, Lyndon, because like I said, white has got a bit of space, so it is easier to move around. It's always important, you know. Mikhail Tal said chess is three things. It's material, space, and time. So material space is very important so that your pieces can move around and so on. And black is desperate to activate his rook as well. And yeah, it would be such a natural move just to play king g3. You protect g4 and you're hitting the rook. But that would maybe allow black now rook h1, and all of a sudden he could become active and invade at the back. So this next move is very delicate that you play. It's not the move that you want to play, but I've noticed that you've been defending and just keeping your own side tidy for the moment. So the next move, rook g3, just keeping your opponent at bay.
100%. And Calvin, you know that a few friends of mine, when we used to analyze my games back in the day, we were always talking about you must have the ability to outsit your opponent. You must sit, whatever happens, you must play the moves, find the moves, and if it goes down to 60, 70 moves, it doesn't matter. You must have the ability to outsit your opponent, not to be worried about anything. Concentrate, look at what the threats are, and slowly improve your position. As you improve your position slowly, then opportunities may arise. But at the moment, they are not arising for white yet, because white is still defending. The pawn on d4, the pawn on b3, and the pawn on g4, all of those things must be defended. But white is still believing in himself. So let us see what happens.
Okay,
right, Calvin, what's our next?
Lyndon, we've got two questions in the chat box here. I just want to go a couple of moves back.
Sure.
So black was, I think it was Patrick that suggested instead of bishop d8 to b6, he's saying, what if black went the rook c8 instead, with the idea of knight takes d4? That might have been something interesting,
Yep, in fact, it's a very, very interesting move. You probably would have to play
d3
something
perhaps,
like rook d3 or knight e2 in order just to release it, to release the pressure there. But absolutely, Patrick, rook c8 is a good move, no doubt about it.
Look,
both.
I like that idea, Lyndon. But like even rook d3 and putting same setup with the bishop on d1. I think black is still gonna struggle to enter on the c file. Maybe that's maybe the thing. But that is a very interesting idea there by Patrick. Nice and active as well. Thanks for that suggestion.
No, thanks, Patrick. Yep.
And then the second suggestion was after rook h4. Bearded Zaid is asking, why did white perhaps not go g5 here and then just with the idea of swapping of rooks? So maybe rook h3, I guess, is what he's suggesting after that. Not rook h5, sorry. So what's the idea? What can you tell me about that, Lyndon?
Yeah, so Calvin, I'm one of those players that I consider myself a classical player. So when you keep the pawn on g4, then you are still the only one with a pawn break on f5. Now, of course, black also has the pawn f6. He can also play that. But the mere fact that you still have the potential to go pawn to f5 and capture, and then you have another pawn on f5 means that the white is maintaining the potential of the pawn break. So pawn to g5 means that you are playing for a draw, because of course black can simply play pawn to g6, close up the position, and all of a sudden the knight has a brilliant square on f5, knight e7 to f5, and then all of a sudden your pieces are always under attack, because the other knight can go to c6, and d4 is then all of a sudden weak. So you don't want to allow your opponent those chances. So don't give your opponent an opportunity to improve his or her position. So the move g5 never entered my headspace. I would rather maintain the position.
I think that's well put, Lyndon. And just a reminder again, guys, that idea of flexibility in your pawn structure. Like Lyndon said, give yourself the option to have a pawn break left. If you have a position where there's no pawn breaks, then there's something wrong, guys. You must at least give yourself an opportunity to break through. So yeah, I fully agree with Lyndon there. G5, maybe not the best ideas here at Zaid. Your opponent might, and even in that final position, you can see, you can just ask yourself, what did I play here? G6. Where's the white king gonna enter? There's no squares for the white king to enter. So it's too blocked up over there. Okay, anyway, so rook G3 was played. Knight to E7.
Yeah, can we just get to the position there with the pawn on G4 and the rook to G3?
Yeah, we've got it right here.
Okay, right. So thanks. Right. So now Bishop C2, and as again just reactivating, positioning the pieces. White played Bishop C2. Yeah, that's where we are, and then Knight to C6.
Yeah.
So remember, both players are now jockeying for position, and now Rook H3. Now we exchanging.
Okay.
Because there's a little tactic here, Calvin.
What if rook takes pawn check?
Yep. What does the viewers say? What would happen after that?
Rook takes pawn check, guys. Is that just a free pawn? King F2, King F1, maybe King H1. King to F3 there by Zaid, of course. King F3 hitting the rook, and maybe to Black's shock, he will realize that there's no square for the rook. All the squares, the knight on E2 is covering G1 as well. So the rook is actually trapped. Pawn to F5, then you can en passant. Then the rook is still hanging and the knight is hanging at the same time with major issues. So yeah, so that's quite a neat one over there. Rook to H3, I like it. So tactically defending G4. And
tactically defending, and then that the rook was very active. Now we get rid of the rook immediately.
So we're swapping off.
There we go there.
And the difference between this position and the one we saw earlier, white still has the flexibility. White can still play F5 at the right moment. Okay, so black plays G6, trying to discourage that idea.
And then immediately, now we can see again, like we saw in the previous
Goldberg
game.
Similar structure.
Very similar. And let's look what happens. There you go, King H4. And of course, now he goes Bishop D8.
Okay, so I like this. I mean, this looks almost the same like the last time with the structure, so you can have good resemblance. Bishop D8.
Course, you've got to be careful of Knight F5 check now. Yeah. So you just move out of the way gently. So remember, the key thing is don't move the pawn. There's no need to move the pawn.
Yeah.
We're keeping that in a reserve because we're looking at what. And then pawn to A5. So for me, Calvin, once he played pawn to A5, that meant that there's no longer pressure on the pawn on B3. Yeah. So that pressure is now removed, which means that I'm not playing on two sides of the board. I'm the only one that with a pawn break, because F6 is no longer a pawn break.
Yes.
It's just a free pawn. So I'm the only one with a pawn break. So now I realized I've got to reposition my pieces because I am now playing for the win, but it's not easy. So let's look at what was White's next move, Calvin. A repositioning move, Knight G1. Immediately, I get the knight was lying on E2 for a long time. Bishop B6, and of course there the knight comes in. A better square on F3. The knight is still defending D4, and now the knight has a potential to go to G5. So that is what the knight wanted. It improved its life a little bit by going from E2, dropping back to G1, a retreat, but then going forward to F3 immediately. So little small moves, but very important.
King to E8 on the board, and now another improvement.
Another improvement, Bishop D3. The bishop now takes a better diagonal because, of course, now that A6, B5 diagonal there, it comes into play, while the bishop is also keeping a nice lookout on the square F5, Calvin, and viewers
Beautiful
on that
bishop.
side.
Knight to C8. So black is actually now in a tough position. Once again, just mentioning this space problem for him. Black doesn't have, we've got the same amount of pieces, but black's pieces don't have nice squares. They don't have a lot of freedom to move, so that's a problem for black. Black plays knight to C8. And
so Calvin, the key thing now for me is I'm happy to repeat some moves to gain some time on the clock, because I also have the two bishops, remember? So white has the two bishops, black has the two knights, and the two knights don't have squares. So I'm happy to play around a bit, and I want to test my opponent.
Yeah.
And you'll see one or two moves now that tests him, and then he makes a mistake. And I'll tell you when we get there. So let's play the next move. Bishop b5, just spinning him a bit. He attacks the bishop, of course. Now I play bishop a6. Now notice, I've taken away the square on c8. So that knight on a7 can't move.
Yeah, knight is
So
stuck for
all
now.
of a sudden, yeah, he needs to decide what he wants to do in life. And now the other knight drops back. Right,
Okay.
so that's fine. Now we go bishop d3. Okay, I'm cool.
So
Now
the bishop on d3, the one bishop is kind of bothering the two knights together there.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and let's look at what happens now. Knight c6. But now, if you look closely, Calvin, and this is what I want to show the viewers. The same position is on the board, but actually that black knight is now lying on b8.
Yes.
And it's lying at the back doing nothing. And white now has a little move, king f2. So I can bring my king in, no sweat.
All right. So
King f2.
just in the chat here, Patrick was saying dark square root for white king, and then Dr. Queenie says, Lyndon, did you think about the Howard game when you saw the structure here, and did it influence your play?
Calvin, I must say that I did recall the Goldberg game, although in this game I wasn't yet sure how I was going to play like the Goldberg situation. I wasn't sure yet. What I was doing at the moment is black was still keeping me under pressure because I can't move a piece away from the pawn on d4.
Yeah.
But I knew about the Goldberg game, which I had played about 15 years, no, 17 years prior to this game. So yes, the Goldberg game was in my head because I knew that g3, h4, g5 is in the air. That is in the air. But let's see what happens after the next move, Calvin.
And I like that question by Dr. Queenie, but just to add to that, Lyndon, this is the type of stuff, if you have played games like this with a structure, like the structures give you plans in general. There's general themes, there's general breakthroughs. So with a structure like this, we can always automatically think about that break. Doesn't matter what the situation, you need to figure out the dynamics and the timing, but you already know that's a game plan over there.
That's a game plan.
So that's the type of things that you need to be aware of in chess. You need to know your structures. Okay, bishop to d8 played.
So just pause there on bishop d8. So Calvin, with all this maneuvering and stuff like that, I was often thinking about the seventh, the ninth world champion was Tigran Petrosian. Now Petrosian, if you study his games, there was one remark that one of the writers made, one of the authors. They said that Petrosian had the ability to do nothing and to do it well.
Yes.
I will repeat that. Yeah. The ability to do nothing and to do it well. Now, in this case, white was doing that. White was doing nothing. You can see there's no real moves, but black played bishop d8, releasing the pressure on d4. Moment. And at that exact moment, white now played, look at the next move, bishop c1. I like it. So the bishop, like the knight that dropped back to g1, plays now bishop back to c1, and black now plays bishop to d8. But all of a sudden, the bishop reappears on e3, because now the bishop has life on that as defending d4, but also has life now to h6. Yeah. So a repositioning of the pieces that black allowed for 1 millisecond, one lapse of concentration, and all of a sudden that bad bishop on b2 is now improved his life just a little bit by going to c1 and e3, Calvin.
That's beautiful. Petrosian, also one of my favorite world champs, guys. You should check out his games. And that's well put, Lyndon. Also talking about just outsetting your opponent and so on. Because, here in the chat box, we've got a question here from ML. I believe that's Mark. He's saying, why did you not move f5 instead of king f2? So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Calvin, I was still feeling that I needed to get my pieces correctly positioned. So with king f2, I was still thinking of bringing my king to e3, and I was in my head, hoping that his bishop is going to move at some stage.
Yeah,
And he then allowed that.
I think you
So
can maybe
I just
even
want to,
yeah, go ahead.
it's nearly like the shadow boxing that the boxers do. You
Yeah.
know that you have the rope a dope. You just want to, you go this way, you want to see what he's going to do. You go the other way, and then all of a sudden there he plays bishop d8. He fell for it, and all of a sudden the bishop comes in, because now Calvin and Mark Lewis 1808 with the bishop on c1, then the diagonal is strengthened to g5 and h6. So that is the idea that I had there. So it was literally, I didn't want to play f5 immediately. I didn't feel that I was ready in that position. It's a question of timing, and I'm waiting now to see. And here he's given me this position. So that's my explanation, Calvin.
Okay, I can actually add to that as well, Lyndon, but that's quite nice to hear. And maybe just to add to something to the viewers out there as well, it's especially possible for Lyndon to do so because his opponent has nothing to do. Black has got no active plan. Black is not threatening to break somewhere. He's not threatening to get his pieces in. So you can afford to play a bit around with your opponent. But I can also see after king e3, white can slowly play bishop c1, bishop d2, bishop e1, get the bishop on that diagonal, g1, a7 diagonal. And then finally you can retract your king to e2, bishop e3. That will be like the trip around the world, but it's still possible if your opponent does nothing, and you can rearrange that. And then white would be more ready to play f5, I suppose. But yeah, so king f2 played, bishop d8, and now finally you get that bishop that I mentioned at the start of our position. That bad bishop can actually now do a good defensive job and look forward to doing some work on the other side.
Exactly.
Beautiful.
So the two pieces are so happy because the two bishops are standing next to each other. They're working in tandem, as they say, and that knight is also on f3 now. So all of them are happy chaps now. So the key question is now how to assist with the breakthrough. So let's look at the next move, Calvin. There's bishop d8.
King goes back to g3.
And now you see he's repeating the position, but now I feel it's now time. The time has come. The time has come, Calvin.
And there we have it.
There's pawn to f5. So the pawn to f5 now creates tension, and immediately there are questions that need to be asked. And of course, black can't really allow a pawn to be captured on g6 because then the pawn will be isolated. There's a bishop on d3 already looking at it. Even with a knight standing on e7, the king could go to h4, g5, h6, all of those opportunities. So of course, an exchange has to take place, yes, and there's a second exchange that takes place, and then there's knight a7, and now we have a pathway on the light squares, Calvin, as opposed to the dark squares that the black bishop was defending. And white now proceeds king g4.
There we go.
So there we go forward. Now it's knight to a6. Yes, the knight is just repeating. And notice carefully that knight on b8 is still lying there. From earlier on, it's still lying there at the back doing nothing. And there's king g5, my Nigel Short move, king g5. And there's bishop d8. And Calvin, now I had to wait, just before you go forward. This is where I had to make an interesting decision. Do I play pawn to f6, closing the position and then trying to go around? I decided no, I'm not going to do that. I'm rather going to attack the f7 pawn, and we will see now what I conceived in this position. So king h6.
All right.
So now for me, the king is coming to attack f7. And I want the viewers to notice the plan. King g7, and of course, black now has to make a move to stop king g7 because he can't allow that. And he plays the move, Calvin, king f8. But I'm not done yet. I am in for the marathon, Calvin. It's a 42K. The 42K is a marathon. So the white king decided to go fourth in life. And king h7. And the king is now nearing the promotion square. Look, if the king reaches that back square, he's going to ask for a queen. So just be careful. So in this case, bishop b6.
Bishop b6, okay. Black can do nothing but just apply a bit of pressure on d4. And now comes the key question.
Yeah, what's your key question, Calvin?
What to do? Do you make e6 a weakness, or do you push forward, or what do you do?
Calvin, now at this time, we started the game at 6 p.m. on this particular evening. The time now was already probably 10:30, 20 to 11. We were the last game in the hall. We were playing about around table 11 or 12, just below the top 10 tables. We were sitting there. But I decided, you know what? I'm going to go for it, young. And I decided pawn to f6. I'm
Okay.
cutting him off now. I'm cutting him off, which was a similar idea to that c3 that you had in the Goldberg game with pawn to c3 and the king coming around.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, I decided to follow. And in here went now
Knight a7.
knight a7. And I decided, you know what? Now attack the back rank. And I decided I'm attacking the back rank. And I played king h8.
King
so
H8.
the first time, Calvin, in literally we're a middle to end game, and my king has marched from g1 and in a merry way has ended up on h8 in this position. A really fantastic square and a position that you don't often see as well. So then knight c8. And
Okay.
Calvin, I decided now that I'm going to try something interesting because
Okay.
I want the full point. I want the full point. I don't want the draw. I want the full point. So I decided to play bishop to h7. Now, Calvin Nimzowitsch in the book My System says that you must attack the pawn chain and you must attack the base of the pawn chain. Now, I decided that I'm going to come attack the base of this pawn chain from g8. I'm going to attack it.
Okay.
So let us see what's going to happen.
At a7. And yeah, bishop to g8. So the bishop is directly attacking
bishop
f7.
to g8.
Okay. Black now puts pressure on d4, knight a c6.
And then Calvin, now I must tell you that at this stage, there were a few people watching and I had a crowd gathering because it was the last game. Now, Calvin, I'm a guy that loves to play for the gallery. And I decided that, you know what, doesn't matter what happens in life, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go for it. And this is what I played, Calvin. So you can play the next move for the viewers.
Bishop takes f7. Wow. Okay, so I was looking at another idea. We're gonna continue with this brilliant idea here. I think I've got an idea what Lyndon's up to here. But just before we continue, we have a few stuff here in the chat box. Let's see. King Ulster was saying pretty pieces in a row after the life improvement sessions. Bearded Zaid was suggesting bishop to b4, maybe bishop b5, but the bishop was going to get chased away. And then Patrick was saying the plan is bishop h6 check, followed by king g8 and bishop g6. Is that an idea as well?
That's also a plan. Yes, also check. A plan, certainly.
King g8 and then bishop g6. That's another one. Very interesting because if takes and then check and there. Very interesting one, Patrick. That also looks good. Bearded Zaid, said b5. Mark says, I like the principled approach. Okay, thanks, everyone. But Lyndon decides to spark up the board here for the crowd. So bishop takes f7. And I don't think black really has a choice here. But okay, he does. He does do something else. I thought that...
he does something else, Calvin, which is very interesting.
But the question is, what is... Sorry, Lyndon, what happens if king takes, though?
Well, so this is the issue. So if king takes, knight g5 check.
Okay, check. The king now has to abandon the e6 pawn. I would like to play king f8, but then there's a check on e6. So if I go king e8, worried that there might be something very...
So Calvin is also in this position. You also have king g7.
Yes. Threatening f7 check and f8 queen. So black might have to go knight d7 here. Yeah.
Now you see, now these are the things that you play. Both players have got 5 minutes left on the clock. So now the clock is also a pressure piece.
Yes.
So in this position, Calvin, you could even, instead of playing king, you can just capture there. There's a whole series of ideas that you have there. But I wanted to create the possibility of the win. I didn't want to do.
I think this is brilliant because these two pass pawns on how far they are advanced they are is winning already. Knight takes e6, s7 check, f8 is already on the spot winning. the knight on d4, of course, on e6, of course, covering d4 as well. So brilliant there, yeah. You could play this a bit with intuition, but to calculating as well, you can, obviously you guys don't have much time, but brilliant feel for the position there, Lyndon.
No, thanks, Calvin. Look, I'm sure the computers and stuff, they will find, where I made a mistake and those things. But, Calvin, 2 minutes, 3 minutes on the clock. You've played 5-hour sessions. We're all human. And I decided I'm going for it.
Yeah.
So it's my opponent that must find the refutation on the board. That is what he must do. So yeah, the computer can find mistakes afterwards, but you must still find the refutation on the board. So in this case, my opponent decided to play knight takes d4.
Knight takes d4, so he's sacking back in order to make...
Sacking back in order to take my pieces away from the king side.
Maybe he wants this knight on f3 to get distracted, perhaps.
Yeah, but then I just saw, but here's something very interesting, Calvin. What happens if I play bishop to g6?
Oh my.
Because all of a sudden, I'm threatening mate.
And the king on h8 is beautifully placed there.
The king on h8 is attacking the g8 square. So that king has found its niche in life. And Black now played knight f5, giving up a piece.
Yeah, the only move to stop bishop h6, mate.
But I decided, Calvin, because the crowds had now gathered, it's not good to simply capture a bishop, and I went for knight to g5.
Wow. Okay. Wow.
And the mate cannot be stopped. There's a mate on h7, and there's a mate on e6.
Okay, so we've learned now after this game, there's 2 ways to mate with the king on h8 and the bishop on g6. And either with the knight on h7 or the bishop on h6. Okay, that's beautiful. And I know I would have probably grabbed that bishop on b6 and then go look for a mate afterwards. This is brilliant. Okay. And again, we see the difference in the two sides with that king march. If the king was never, if the white king never penetrated, all of this wouldn't have been possible.
Yes.
So
now,
brilliant.
Now, Calvin. So one of the viewers has also pointed something out, and I must just tell you that when I was preparing for the lecture tonight, I had a preparation session with my brother-in-law, Jacques Frick. And Jacques found the idea that bearded Zaid found. So Calvin, if you can go back to the position of bishop h7, just before we play bishop h7, if we can just go back to that position before bishop h7, just get a bishop, play bishop b5.
I think it's bearded Zaid also, that he mentioned this. He mentioned this
bishop
idea.
b5. And guess what?
Oh my.
White has a forced mate.
Ooh, bearded Zaid.
Yes.
Sorry that I didn't look at that but earlier. I think you said bishop b5 and I got confused. But that's a nice idea.
Yes. So this was the idea that Jacques found afterwards, my brother-in-law, when we were preparing for the session, because of course, remember, I was not looking for a mate on the queen side. I'm looking for a mate on the king side.
Yes.
And it never crossed my mind to play bishop b5 to take away the e8 square, and then h8 is mate.
Yo, that would have been pretty as well. That would have been very pretty.
So, but I mean, we found that after about 17 years. Remember, this is now, we've looked at the game many times, but we didn't find this. And then with the assistance of the computer, Jacques came to point this out to me one day and just said, did I consider this? And Calvin, I didn't consider it because, of course, king h8, bishop h7, as Mark Lewis says, the principled approach, I was going for the f7 pawn. I was not going for the mate on the other side. Calvin, so that's my games that I wanted to illustrate tonight, that after seeing that wonderful king march of king h2 to g3, f4, that I also have some king marches that I wanted to illustrate as well.
All right. So, great game, Lyndon. And well spotted there, bearded Zaid. So great stuff. And I just want to thank everybody for watching and for commenting. Patrick says beautiful playing for the gallery, and Mark Lewis says opposition was key. So thanks so much for these games, Lyndon, they were brilliant. I think hopefully people have discovered that they must use their king in the end game. So I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll see some more from you in the future with our London lectures.
Yep. So Calvin, thank you very much, and Calvin will send out the date and time for the next lecture. But in the next lecture, we're going to look at exchange sacrifices, Calvin, and how to play the exchange sacrifice in tournament games, because many players are of course scared to play exchange sacrifices, but it's part and parcel of chess as well. So thanks, Calvin, and thank you viewers for engaging and being interactive tonight as well.
All right. No, thanks so much, Lennon, to you as well for coming up with this lecture, and I'm looking forward to the next one. And yeah, have a nice evening, and we'll see you guys next time. Cheers, cheers.
Thanks, everybody. See you. Bye.